Mr. Wells, I've never smoked, but I'm going to begin to take up smoking and use Philip Morris as the cigarette for me to take.
So the last time we watched this interview of Margaret Sanger, I gave you what I was discerning, and we came up with the conclusion that the main purpose for this video or for this interview was for the corporation Philip Morris to promote their cigarettes. Now, I believe they saw Margaret Sanger as the perfect person to do this because they wanted to widen their consumer base, and she's a feminist, a well-known feminist, so why not use Margaret Sanger? Why not do a give and take quad pro quo situation where she promotes herself and her brand and what she does and her message while also promoting the cigarette brand, and endorse this brand in hopes that people just like Margaret Sanger or people who look up to Margaret Sanger would be compelled to buy these cigarettes. So Margaret Sanger would not have the opportunity to partner with such a big company if it weren't for this guy who you're going to see now, whose name is Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays is who they called the father of propaganda, aka the father of public relations, which is what he deemed as a more appealing or a more pleasant term to describe what he does, which is basically manipulating the public and manipulating our emotions, manipulating our desires to sway us in a certain way, or to sway us to get us to purchase a certain product. I mean, this is a very powerful tool, and I believe that it's not necessarily bad, but I think it just depends on how it's being used. And I think we need to be more cognizant and pay more attention to how this thing called public relations or propaganda is still affecting us today. But for now, let's just see what Edward Bernays is all about and just put two and two together when it comes to Margaret Sanger's place and the women's suffrage movement. You know, things like selling cigarettes, appealing to women, feeding off the weaknesses of men and women, using sexuality to sell products, and just, you know, have all of those things floating in our minds when we look at this video, and just put two and two together and let's see what we come up with at the end.
And so Eddie began to formulate this idea that you had to look at things that would play to people's irrational emotions. And you see, that moved Eddie immediately into a different category from other people in his field and most government officials and managers of the day who thought if you just hit people with all this factual information, they would look at that and say, oh, of course. And Eddie knew that was not the way the world worked.
So according to what this guy just said, people like Edward Bernays believe that us human beings, us average, regular, everyday people, we do not have the capacity to decipher information for ourselves. Like, somebody can't just lay the information out and we can sift through it and decide and make the best decision. People like this do not believe that we have this capacity or capability. And I don't know, let's watch the video and see if it's true. Maybe it's true, maybe, I don't know. Let's see.
Bernays set out to experiment with the minds of the popular classes. His most dramatic experiment was to persuade women to smoke. At that time, there was a taboo against women smoking, and one of his early clients, George Hill, the president of the American Tobacco Corporation, asked Bernays to find a way of breaking it.
He said, we're losing half of our market because men have invoked a taboo against women smoking in public. Can you do anything about that?
So what we just watched just goes to show how corporations view human beings as just numbers, as a way to widen their consumer base. I think it's very disrespectful, and it's crossing the line for a corporation to feel like they can have the authority to undo a boundary that men already laid out for women. If men laid out a boundary that said smoking cigarettes, women smoking cigarettes is a taboo, I believe that was for our protection's sake, because I mean, we all know that cigarettes cause cancer. We all know that it's detrimental to our health. It's no place of a corporation to undo that by hiring professionals, hiring psychoanalysts and a PR guy to sway public perception, and to have someone like Margaret Sanger, who's supposed to be a humanitarian, a feminist, on board to get other women on the bandwagon with her just to prop herself up, just to widen someone else's consumer base. I think that's very unethical, and it just goes to show how disrespectful corporations can be, and how I believe this capitalist society needs it needs to make some adjustments. And I believe it sheds light on the fact that maybe women's suffrage and the people of that movement, maybe there were sinister reasons behind it. Like I always say, maybe it's more than just women being free and being able to do whatever they want and being able to compete with the man and be equal to a man. Maybe it's a little more than that. Maybe it's a little more than what meets the eye. Maybe this guy Edward Bernays had something to do with it. Maybe it's all about public perception and we were made to perceive something like freedom when in actuality we were just chaining ourselves, in bad health and just being a number, just being a consumer base for a corporation.
I said, let me think about it. And then I said, have I your permission to see a psychoanalyst to find out what cigarettes mean to women? He said, what'll it cost? So I called up Dr. Brill, A.A. Brill, who was a leading psychoanalyst in New York at that time.
How come you didn't call your uncle? Why didn't you call your uncle?
Because he was in Vienna.
A.A. Brill was one of the first psychoanalysts in America. And for a large fee, he told Bernays that cigarettes were a symbol of the penis and of male sexual power. He told Bernays that if he could find a way to connect cigarettes with the idea of challenging male power, then women would smoke, because then they would have their own penises.
I don't know what you think, but I just think that is so evil. Like, who is another human being? How can these people just go out of their way to literally change the way that a person thinks, And how can something like that be legal? It's not right. It's exploitation. I don't know. I just think it's so wrong that somebody was allowed to do this. Because, apparently women didn't naturally think like this on their own. They had to hire professionals to sway the opinion and to manipulate the mind of a woman to make her feel like she too can have a penis. Something's very flawed about that. And if you don't see that too, then I don't know where we're going and where we're headed.
Every year, New York held an Easter Day parade to which thousands came. And Bernays decided to stage an event there. He persuaded a group of rich debutantes to hide cigarettes under their clothes. Then they should join the parade, and at a given signal from him, they were to light up the cigarettes dramatically.
Oh man, I feel like this is another example of things just not being what it seems. It's like easily somebody could have seen these women and believed that they were doing this on their own, that this was something new, and something exciting and something that, hey, maybe I should partake in because look at these beautiful women, these rich upper class women. Look at what they're doing. Maybe I should do it too. It's so interesting that, I don't know, the things that people get away with. And it's like, if this was happening back then, what would make us think that it's not still happening now? I guess my point is that even today, there's certain agendas that people push just for the sake of, okay, this business or this industry is going to profit the most. So we're going to push this narrative. We're going to pay these people, or we're going to send these people out to portray a certain image so people just like them can get on board. I guess another thing that this shows is the direct relationship with corporations and politics. It's like, and even translating to today, a lot of the things that we see that are political now, all in your face, Black Lives Matter, women, empowerment, LGBT, everything that you see, they, like I've said in a previous video, we wouldn't have the voice that we have. Things wouldn't be so open and so politicized if there weren't industries benefiting from it. So then we just have to ask ourselves, which are the industries that benefit most, even till this day, from, what they believe to be a weakness, like men and women have problems in the home, or black people are suffering from this trauma, or LGBTQ people. My problem is not the fact that we have this thing called, well, what people would call, I don't call it that, but I've heard it been called trauma bonds. You know, I don't care about the fact that we have the trauma bonds, but my problem is the fact that corporations think that they can capitalize off of our trauma. You know, they think they can capitalize off of the fact that black people as a collective went through this horrible thing, and they feel that the best thing that they can do is continue to bombard us with images and generate content and put it everywhere that we go, just so that, you know, in our minds, when we see a product that identifies with that pain, we're more compelled to buy. That's where I have the problem. And I have the problem when they do it with women as well, when they find a weakness between men and women and things that make us unsatisfied about each other, and then they start to play with sexuality and appeal to us in that way. It's not right, and no business has the right to tamper with humanity in that way. And this is still happening till today. You know, I believe that we should use the past as a reference to understand where we are today, you know, and so that we can have more control over where we're going to be in the future. Because if we leave things the way that they are, it's just going to continue the way that it's going. And the way that it's going is not necessarily good for us, the human beings, you know. These corporations do not see us as humans. They see us as numbers, you know. We need to really pay attention to tactics like this that they use, which is not necessarily a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with public relations. There's nothing wrong with advertising. There's really nothing wrong with psychoanalyzing. There's nothing wrong with these things. They are simply tools. But the question is, how are these corporations using these tools, and are they for our greater good? How are they still manipulating us, you know, and is it for the better?
Bernays then informed the press that he had heard that a group of suffragettes were preparing to protest by lighting up what they called torches of freedom.
He knew this would be an outcry, and he knew that all of the photographers would be there to capture this moment. And so he was ready with a phrase, which was torches of freedom. And so here you have a symbol, women, young women, debutantes, smoking a cigarette in public, with a phrase that means anybody who believes in this kind of equality pretty much has to support them in the ensuing debate about this.
Torches of freedom. I think it's so interesting how they come up with these really cute phrases that don't mean what they actually say. It's like torches of freedom. How can you convince women that lighting up a torch, inhaling it, and smoking up their lungs is somehow liberating, you know? It's crazy that somebody can literally manipulate you to think that something that's terrible for you is liberating. That is crazy. And this is the root, the essence of where something like women's suffrage and women empowerment comes from, at least the symbolism of it. You know, it's crazy. And it's like, even looking at today, we have this phrase where women love to say, I have my reproductive rights, or I'm entitled to my reproductive rights. It's like, what does that actually mean? Reproductive rights to me would mean that I have the right to reproduce. But what I'm trying to say is, if back then they can convince women that lighting a cigarette is a form of lighting a torch to freedom, how much more would they not do that today? It's like, easily today, you can have a company like Planned Parenthood take the phrase, my reproductive rights, and completely flip it and change the meaning to have us think that aborting your child is somehow liberating. You know, somehow there's a give and take, and you're getting freer, or you're taking your liberty back somehow. But what is it that you're taking back? You didn't take anything back. In fact, you took something from life. You took another human being away from life. You know, you took a life. That is not freeing. You know, you robbed somebody of their right to exist, their right to life. So we have to think about these things.
It's because torches of freedom. I mean, what's on all American coins? It's liberty. She's holding up the torch. You see? And so all of this is there together. There's emotion, there's memory, there's a rational phrase. Even though it's using a lot of emotional elements, it's a phrase that works in a rational sense, All of this is together. And so the next day, this was not just in all of the New York papers, it was across the United States and around the world. And from that point forward, the sale of cigarettes to women began to rise. He had made them socially acceptable with a single symbolic ad.
So it became acceptable for women to smoke cigarettes with just one symbolic ad. That is interesting. And I think that makes me want to question, like, what's symbolic today? Like, what are the symbolic gestures that we get from politicians? And what are the symbolic ads that we see on TV? Symbolic ads on social media? You know, what does this symbolism actually mean? How does it benefit us? And if we see these symbols, it's like, what's in it for these people? You know, like I said in a previous video, any movement that's made popular is because big industry sees a way to benefit from it, a way to expand their consumer base, a way to use humans as numbers. So it's like, okay, if they're in it for the numbers, it's like, what's in it for us? That's what we need to start asking. What's in it for us when we have to see a black guy being killed by a police as soon as it's time to go out and vote? Or all of a sudden you see an app come out of the woodworks called BLK that, you know, they do whatever they do. And I'm going to link a video here or down in the description that you can click where I talked about that. So it's like, what is it? What's in it for us? That's what we need to start asking ourselves. It's like, okay, we understand. You see that something's going on here with us. Okay, you want my attention as a black person, or you want my attention as a female because you're pandering to me. But what do I get in return? What's in it for me? There's nothing wrong with advertisement, like I said before. There's nothing wrong with big business. There's nothing wrong with capitalism itself. But capitalism needs to be regulated by the people who empower it, by the people who it sells its products to. We have to put ourselves first. We have to keep ourselves in mind when people pander to us with symbolism.
What Bernays had created was the idea that if a woman smoked, it made her more powerful and independent, an idea that still persists today.
Embrace me, my sweet embrace.
It made him realize that it was possible.
Still happening where you have a company like Planned Parenthood that's convinced women that a phrase like "my reproductive rights" means the right to kill your child, when in reality that means that we all have the right to reproduce. We all have the God-given right to multiply, to bring life into the world. And everybody, no matter if the person is born or not, has the right to be here. You know, if just like we have the rights to our bodies and doing what we want with it, like getting pregnant or something like that, that child, when conceived, has the right to be here just like any other human being. And we have to take responsibility for that. And I feel like companies like Planned Parenthood takes the responsibility away, and then we give ourselves off to these corporations that do not have our best interests in mind, especially now where everything is so over politicized and everything is about sexuality and everything is about trauma of the past. And, you know, I believe these corporations are, well, it's true. It's not even the belief. You know, these corporations feel like they can get away with everything and hide certain information from us and distract us from issues that we'll probably face a couple of years down the line, but we didn't even know about them because we were so fixated on whatever image, whatever ad, whatever symbolic, you know, advertisement that they put out there as some sort of a bait to have us not really focused on reality. And that's what I really want us to think about from watching little clips like this.
Possible to persuade people to behave irrational. Possible to persuade people to behave irrational.
Miss Sanger, I thank you so much for taking time out and coming and talking to us here this evening.
And Mr. Wells, I've never smoked, but I'm going to begin to take up smoking and use Philip Morris as the cigarette for me to take.
Well,
if you link products to their emotional desires and feelings. The idea that smoking actually made women freer was completely irrational, but it made them feel more independent. It meant that irrelevant objects could become powerful emotional symbols of how you wanted to be seen by others.
So now I want to say, as much as I believe that corporations should be held accountable and have no right to manipulate human beings to do negative things against our own will, against our own well-being, I also think that the individual in society needs to be held accountable. I believe that man and woman should be accountable to each other. And I believe that until the individual takes accountability for its own or his or her own actions, we're going to continue to see negative repercussions in society. Society is going to continue to be imbalanced. We're going to continue to make irrational decisions because we've left the door wide open for an entity, for a business, for somebody with more money and power to literally shape the way that we think and shape our own decision making. I would hate for someone to see this video or see videos that I make and think that I'm an anti-feminist. I am not an anti-feminist. I stand for, women expressing themselves and women having a certain level of freedom in society and a certain level of being able to fulfill our own needs and fulfill maybe a purpose that's on our hearts. And I believe there's a way to do that, and there's a disciplined way to go about it. And anything we do, I don't think that the man should be left out of the equation. I believe that before society can figure out all of its problems, the individual male and female, man and woman, needs to understand how to coexist in this world, how to coexist in this society. And I feel that we've gotten it all wrong, and God has already laid out a way for us to do that and get it right. I believe that what corporations know is that two minds are better than one. The more minds you have in sync, the better and more efficient you can, get to your destination or reach your goal. And I believe it goes the same for the individuals in society. I believe that God designed a system where it's in our nature to follow another person's lead. It's in our nature to be malleable. It's in our nature to be swayed. This is our nature as human beings, but there's a certain way to go about it. There's a certain structure to it. And when it's structured properly and we follow the structure that God already laid out for us, it doesn't leave us vulnerable and leave us scattered and leave us so open to something like a corporation that wants to take the opportunity from seeing this in human nature, the need to be led. I believe we all have this need, or just the willingness to be swayed and the willingness to be persuaded. We can't leave that door open. I believe as individuals in society, we have to be more grounded and more rooted in our thoughts. And we need a foundation of wisdom so that when people present information to us, we know how to sift through it, we know how to go through it and come up with a rational decision. And people like these, people like Edward Bernays, the big companies who hired them, they figured that we don't have this skill of thinking rationally. I believe that this is not true. I believe that we are more than capable of making decisions for ourselves and making the best decision with just information laid out to us. It's just like the Bible says, I don't think that we were created to function on our own and to just be individuals floating around collecting information from the outside world. I believe that we're supposed to have a strong internal compass or a strong internal foundation that can then help us to look out here in the world and really filter everything and come from a place of wisdom when we do make those decisions. And I don't believe that we can have this wisdom without having God in our lives. I believe this is why God structured things the way that he did in the Bible. Even in the Bible, God mentioned that it is not his will that man should be alone, because I believe that he understood that man and woman should function together with him so that they can be the strongest, that they can be in this world. They can be strong and not easily manipulated by something like a corporation that wants to take God's place in people's lives, that wants to take, the place of parents in children's lives, that wants to take just the place of a higher governing, a higher controlling force in human beings' lives. And there's nothing wrong with companies having a certain level of power, but it's a problem when companies are allowed to to move in a way or allowed to act in a way that's against the human well-being, that's against the consciousness of the human being. It's like, if you tell me that smoking a cigarette is going to liberate me somehow, you know, just for me to buy more products that you know are harmful to me, and somehow you convince me that that is a good thing. It's like, there's a flaw in my thinking, and there's a problem with me as an individual in just the way that I process information. So that goes to show me that just us, from a collective standpoint, just us being out here in our own, like, you know, way, our own thinking, and all the collective thinking that's emerged along the way, it's like we've gotten something wrong. It's like something's not adding up if we still can't just look at a bunch of information and just process that correctly and make the right decision. Just as these people, these psychoanalysts and these PR specialists predicted in the past. And they're still implementing like these formulas today. Like, you still see these campaigns that pander to us through symbolic ads and stuff like that. You know, we're still seeing these things go on. So that means that there's a flaw in our collective thinking right now. There's a way that God structured for the human being to function that we have just not been aligned with, and it's been leading us astray. It's taken us to a place where we've become just numbers for big corporations. You know, they get to, you know, identify me as a black woman and say, okay, I can pander to her in this way. Okay, let's put out this symbolic advertisement that'll get her to maybe vote for this person who I put all this money into their campaign, and whatever products that I put out are directly linked to the symbol that I had them put out to target this black young woman right here. So it's like it all goes hand in hand, but you know, we can't digest the information, process it, and make the best decisions as long as we're outside of the way that God designed for us to live as human beings. You know, we're not numbers. We are humans. We function a certain way. We have emotions. We have our spiritual self. We have our mental well-being that we have to take into consideration. And apparently we can't do that on our own. Like, I talk about the feminist movement. I'm not completely against the feminist movement. It's just, there's something wrong if someone like Margaret Sanger is, you know, one of the feminists who I guess society respects so much that she still has such a big impact on everything today as far as our everyday lives, our political lives. Like, literally right now, you can say that, okay, you want to get pregnant, or you can say that you want to have a good time with this person, you get pregnant, and boom, Margaret Sanger still today has a clinic that's government funded, you know, that's funded by us. And we can just go in there and just discard a child. And somehow, back in the day, they convinced us that this is the feminist way. This is the liberating way. This is freedom of choice. This is the right, you know, to liberty. It's the right to do something for yourself, when in actuality, it's giving you the right to take another person's life, when that person has the God-given right to life. You know, it's like giving you the right to put yourself through mental turmoil that you didn't have before, through the mental impacts of taking your own child, of having an extension of you that God allowed you to conceive and put out there into the world, and just have that on your conscience that, oh my God, I just took this person's life. I just took this extension of me away from existence, you know. And it does something, and you know, it does something to your psyche. It does something to your spiritual self, to your emotional self, to your mental self. You know, it does something to you as an individual, and it's in no way liberating. And we cannot perceive this collectively because, like I said, we are outside of the way that God designed for us to be, the way that God designed for us to process information. And these big corporations understand that. And they understand that the fact that we do not have godly understanding in our lives, they can walk in the door and take that as an opportunity to profit somehow. It's like our weakness becomes an opportunity. And this is why I believe we should see that God's way for us, you know, for man and woman to coexist on this planet, to coexist in society, is the only way that we can possibly make decisions that are best for ourselves. It's the only way that we can possibly have more than one mind together to really direct our energy to have the best outcomes for our own personal lives, to be able to direct our lives in a direction that's beneficial to ourselves and our own needs. It's like my needs may be different from your needs, my goals may be different from your goals, but I know that if I have somebody who resonates with my goals and we're on one accord with that, and God put the same thing in our hearts, it's like we move in sync and we can get more done, and we don't have to have, there's no weakness between us and what we're trying to accomplish, you know? I don't know if that's something that's important to people, but apparently it's important to these big companies, and they see that as an opportunity. The fact that we're not moving in that way, the fact that we're so disconnected, you know, the fact that the woman goes here and the man goes here and we're just so in conflict with each other, the fact that man has not learned how to love woman properly and give us one of our most, I don't know, it's like one of the things that we need the most, which is love. And we maybe weren't able to find that over the years, and that's led us astray, and it's led us to make our own decisions. It's led us to want to be more independent. We are seeking that love outside of ourselves, outside of men, outside of man, in the sense where God designed it, you know, outside of the union, so to say, outside of just the way that God designed it. Like I said before, it's like, you know, maybe our needs weren't met properly. And it's like, there's also this thing where, you know, men feel like women are so rebellious, and, you know, it's like we can't get along, and women don't respect men. They have this need for respect and they have this need for submission, but it's like human nature is not, at least from the point of view that I see it, it's like a woman is not going to submit to a man unless that man first can show her that he knows how to submit. A woman is not going to be led, you know, by someone who hasn't been able to lead himself properly. It's like, you know, at least that's how I see it. I feel like it's, a man is not worthy to be submitted to by a woman if he cannot be the example of what that submission looks like. And it's not about submitting to man or submitting to corporations, submitting to politicians, submitting to status, submitting to money, submitting to your job, submitting to everything outside of you. It's about submitting to your core, submitting to that God force in you, submitting to that God force that gives you the wisdom on how to love us as women, so that we don't go our own way, so that we don't be so weak for something like a corporation to, you know, take advantage of that weakness and see an opportunity to profit from the fact that we want to do our own thing, or we, you know, feel entitled to whatever, or we feel like we want to be free in some other way outside of the union that God designed. So it's like we all have a role to play. We all have a part in the things that unfold in society, but it's just analyzing ourselves to see what, you know, what do we gain from these situations? What are our needs? You know, get in sync with our needs as human beings first and foremost. I'm not even just talking about like needs from man versus needs from a woman, this and that, but just our needs as human beings, you know, our spiritual, mental, emotional needs, and how do we cater to that? You know, ask ourselves that. And from there, you know, we can put things into perspective and see, okay, well, how do we want to do things? It's like, what's working for us, what's not working, and what did God say works, and have we tried it? And if we did, where did we go wrong? You know, we need to ask ourselves alternative questions that are not being asked in the mainstream media, because it's not beneficial to these corporations. You know, human strength is not beneficial to big business. That's just the way that it goes. Human strength is not beneficial to big government. Human strength, human union, human humans being healthy and putting their minds together and working towards a common goal, not being so easily swayed and manipulated, and not being a weak target for some PR campaign that wants to convince me that smoking a cigarette is liberating somehow, or helping me to be more of a feminist, or something like that. It's like, how do we get to that place? And it's like, it's gonna take us doing something on our own, a collective effort on our part, to decide for ourselves that, look, no, I'm not who you say that I am. I'm not some machine. I'm not some number. I'm not a person who can't filter information. Like, what do you mean you can't give me all the information and have me make a rational decision from it? It's like, what do you mean you have to make my decisions for me? And I guess until we get to that space, it's like everything else is just surface, and it's just, things that corporations back and put out because they see a way to profit. They see opportunity. They see weakness and how they can capitalize off of that weakness. And it's like, I think about how people think that a socialist society is going to fix something like that, when it's like, how is that going to fix the problem if the same corporations still have the same amount of power that they have? And it's not about deplatforming or stripping power away from companies, but it's about the individual taking responsibility for his and her life, and her responsibilities and her duties and her needs, his and her needs, and all of that, and framing the world around that. The world literally needs to be framed around the well-being of the human being. This is our planet. It's our world. I was looking at this thing about outer space yesterday, and it was just talking about like all the different planets that were recently discovered. I didn't even know there were so many planets, some new planets or whatever. I'm looking at these planets and I'm seeing like how how interesting they are. Like, there was one that, has all of these, like, it has so much pressure in it that it creates just a bunch of diamonds, but like, it's not somewhere that a human can physically exist, of course. Or one that, is so extremely hot and whatever, just stuff like that. And it just made me think about Earth and how much of a beautiful ecosystem, a beautiful atmosphere that we have, and how well balanced this place is. It's like, our storms aren't even like compared to storms like on some foreign planet that wasn't built for us. I don't know how to explain it, but it's just like, it just made me so grateful for this planet called Earth, because it's just so catered to me as a human being. I can just step outside and breathe this free, fresh air and just look at these beautiful plants, and they nourish me. And it's like, the animals are here, and everything is just so well balanced to us as human beings. And I feel like we need to do the best with what God has given us. It's like, before exploring everything outside of us, we have to really look at what we already have and how can we make it better. Like, this is literally, like, it just made me see how Earth is literally like a paradise. And it's just like, wow. It's like, are you going to live here and let these corporations continue to like do whatever they want? Of course, now they have their environmental like endeavors that they want to, whatever. But, at the same time, it's like, what about us? Like, okay, corporations all of a sudden care about the environment, but what about the human being? It's like, okay, what about us? It's like, the environment was literally created for us to be able to live somewhere that's effortless. Like, it's effortless to live here on Earth. Like, you don't have to worry about, like, I don't know. It's like, you literally walk outside, unless you have a pollution problem. And if you do, then that's like, if you have a pollution problem, then that's something to be fixed, of course. But it's like, for the most part, like, we step out, we breathe this beautiful air. It's like, everything is made for us in this skin that we're in. And, this nervous system that we have, and everything was just catered to us as human beings. So it's like, how do we work with that, and how do we best coexist in that? And how do we put ourselves first? Because Earth literally revolves around us. I mean, the universe doesn't revolve around us, but Earth definitely revolves around us. So that tells me that we are the center of Earth, and we have to really put ourselves first as human beings and analyze what's best for us and demand what's best for us.